Welcome to the BIP Ventures Extraordinary Pursuits podcast, a fascinating and inspiring journey into the world of venture capital and startups. Each episode offers masterclasses and entrepreneurial stories from some of the top minds in the innovation economy. Get ready to unlock new ideas and gain valuable advice for how to thrive as an innovator and an investor. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Extraordinary Pursuits from BIP Ventures. I'm your host, Rachelle Kuramoto. On this episode, we are joined by Graham Allcott, the founder of professional development company Think Productive. He's also a global speaker and the author of numerous books, including the global bestseller, How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and the new book, Kind, The Quiet Power of Kindness at Work. Graham is a go-to speaker and productivity advisor for companies including Amazon, British Airways, Disney, and eBay. In this conversation, Graham shares research-backed insights about why focusing on attention, not time, can make us more productive and effective. He takes an honest look at the sources of procrastination and offers ways to eliminate them, and gives encouragement to anyone who believes that they have to grind to get ahead. This is a great conversation that I think you will find incredibly useful. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Extraordinary Pursuits from BIP Ventures. I am your host, Rachelle Kuramoto, and I am absolutely delighted today to have a special guest, Graham Allcott, joining us. He is a multi-time author whose books focus predominantly on the workplace, on efficiency, and on how we interact with one another with kindness and effectiveness. So we are going to have a great conversation today about all of those topics, really centering on how we manage ourselves, how we manage our time, how we manage our attention, and what happens when we do that well. Graham, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really good to be here.
Yes, thank you. So, Graham, as we are getting started, why don't you take a few minutes, tell us a little bit about yourself? We would love to hear about your books and, why you've chosen to focus on these topics.
Yeah, so as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm based in England on the south coast down here in Brighton. And for the past 15 years or so, I've had this company, Think Productive, and we work with just some of the leading organizations around the world on some of the things you just mentioned. So helping people to really focus on productivity and efficiency, but also on some of those core skills of work, whether it's, how to deal with Microsoft Teams and Slack, whether it's project management skills. And, this new book I've just written is all about kindness at work as well. And it's fair to say that if you'd have said to me when I was at school that I would, be a best-selling author of a book on productivity, I would have laughed. It would just have been like the craziest thing. I always got a lot of stuff done, but I was never an organized person. That was never a natural thing for me. And I was literally someone who double booked myself on a time management course early in my career, and that actually happened. It was one of those things where it wasn't my natural style to be organized. But what I found was I reached this point in the early part of my career. I'd been working in the not-for-profit world. I was running a small not-for-profit that was national, has a lot of influence on government at the time. And I basically managed to bypass middle management and just go straight into this leadership role, right? In what was basically a startup that I was growing. And when I left that job, there was one day where I was sat at my desk and I had all these ideas and I looked around to see who was going to help me with all these ideas. And then I realized the desk was in my spare room in London and I had no team. I was just a freelancer on my own. And I suddenly thought, man, I need a whole new skill set. And I really need to learn how to deal with detail, how to be organized, how to be a completer finisher. This was all stuff that I didn't really need in the previous part of my career, which was, managing this not-for-profit and being the leader and being the public face of it. And so I really just started to, just consume everything I could find on efficiency, on time management, on how to be a better version of myself. And then at the end of that process, I started to just develop my own techniques and my own things around that just felt right for me. And that's what became the basis of my business, Think Productive, and it's what became the basis of Productivity Ninja, which has gone on to become a bestseller in a few different countries. And is this just amazing little thing that is like the gift that keeps on giving. Because I'll just be, just minding my own business one day and something will drop into my inbox from someone in Japan or New Zealand or something. It'll be someone I've never met before who has just connected with me through this book that I wrote. And I put at the end of the book, here's my email address. Reach out and tell me what you've implemented as a result of the book. And it's just this lovely way to sort of connect with all these different humans from around the world. So that's been my career. So Think Productive started in 2009. And these days I've got an MD that runs that business and a really amazing team that go out and do most of the delivery work. And I'm concerned with just I do a few keynotes here and there at kind of conferences and corporate events and stuff. And then I think about what the next book might be. And I write a weekly email. So I have this email list called Rev Up for the Week, where every week I'm kind of reacting to what's going on, either in my world or in the news, and then just writing something that is positive or productive on a Sunday evening for people to take into the following week. So yeah, that's me. A single dad with a 11-year-old son with disabilities as well. So that takes up a lot of time. Massive sports fan, massive music fan, lots of other things going on. But that's the sum total of me, really.
Well, I love it. I think that you've said a few things that I think really resonate. The comment you made about not being particularly organized, I think it really, really resonates, particularly, I think, when you're talking to people who are fairly singularly focused on solving a challenge. A lot of entrepreneurs start companies because they see a challenge, they see a complex problem, they don't see an existing solution. And so they're like, all right, I'm going to do this. And, I think much in the same way that you started writing for, if I heard your story right, where it's like, I see that there's a challenge out there and I may very well be the best person to do this. I'm going to learn everything I can along the way. And I'm going to make this happen. So often I think that singular focus though has kind of a dark underbelly, which is like everything else gets a little bit chaotic.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
To sort of add to the challenge, a lot of startup leaders, a lot of entrepreneurs are visionaries. They're leaders, maybe not managers. And so the time management, the organization, the structuring details maybe doesn't come as natural to them. So it's not surprising to me that your books are resonating with people, because that is something that I think a lot of us really do try to work on. And from the sounds of things, you have done a really good job of creating structure and habit in your own life. And so it sounds like you're drinking your own Kool-Aid and, living the work. So I think that's very cool.
Yeah,
Very
for
cool.
sure. I think there's a couple of things. One is, you're right. A lot of entrepreneurs are much more natural leaders than managers. They're much more natural visionaries, and they'll double down on, the problem they're trying to solve or the thing that they're working on. But actually, often a lot of the detail behind that and the organization behind that is something that doesn't come naturally, I think, to a lot of entrepreneurs. There's a lot of chaos that goes around that. And the other thing is, I definitely had times in my life where I would be so focused and so much of my drive and energy would be on what I was creating at work. And whether that's in the early part of my career when I was working for this not-for-profit, I was really concerned with like, how do I make a reputation for myself so that my career's in good shape? How do I lead this organization that's when I joined it was a bit of a basket case, to be honest. And I managed to sort of turn it around and grow it quite a bit while I was there. And so that kind of stuff takes up so much of your energy that then you don't have much left for relationships, family, hobbies, work-life balance. Like all these things suffer as well. So, I was asked a few years ago, a friend of mine said to me, how can we always manage to get tickets to go to the Wimbledon, to the tennis. And I was like, because I treat it the same as I treat the rest of my work, right? There's a ballot and you have to be in it. And it basically comes around by Christmas the year before. And so that's got to be in your diary. And so there's kind of things that you can do to make sure that you're living a really well-rounded life and a richer life. And part of that for me is about putting as much emphasis on the projects that I want to complete in all of those other areas as it is on the projects that I want to complete in my work life. So that's a really important component of just how I approach productivity. And then I think like the other thing I really noticed around this topic of productivity and time management, when I was reading a lot of books around it, I noticed that a lot of them were sort of written with this goal of perfectionism. And it was like, let's try and do everything and be everything, and everything's got to be absolutely perfect. And the first words of Productivity Ninja, and I think the reason it really resonated with people as a book, was the first words were, "Dear human being." And it starts as a letter where it's like, life is messy and your work is messy. Like, let's stop trying to make this perfect. And let's acknowledge that we will all screw some things up. We'll all get some things wrong. There'll be chaos. There'll be things that, don't necessarily go our way. And all of that is constantly evolving. So as it evolves, you need to do the best thinking you can in order to really, take advantage of things as they come along, to respond to things as they come along, to be agile, and to ultimately, guide yourself to where you want to get to. But I think this idea that, we sort of get up in the morning and we write a to-do list and then we tick it all off, and then at the end of the day, everything's great. I think it's maybe something that might have worked in the 1970s, which is when a lot of those big best-selling time management books were written. It's like the 70s and 80s. But I just think the world is different now. It's there's a lot more chaos. There's a lot more opportunity. And as a result of that, you've got to be really prioritizing your thinking and your agility around some of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you've really hit on a lot of things. I mean, I think just being agile and, you know, knowing how to sort of pay attention to what's around you and evolve with it is really important. What are some ways that you have found, as you've worked with, different leaders for all of these years, that, you can help people to understand how to manage their attention and
Yeah.
not necessarily manage their time, because they're not the same.
Yeah, they're completely different things. A lot of people focus on managing time blocking, all this kind of stuff. And really what's much more important than that is managing your attention. So people think, your most precious resource is your time. Not true. Your most precious resource is your attention. The difference is that you will have hours of attention where you have really good energy, you have really, a lot of energy, really good quality attention. But you will have hours in your working week where, yeah, you've got a whole hour, but it's Thursday afternoon, you've had a really busy week, you're decision fatigued, and you're just scrolling up and down the email inbox or looking at messages, and it's like the lights are on and no one's home. So you've got time, but you don't have attention in those moments. And what that means is when we think about the number of hours that we have in our week, when we think about, let's say that number is 40, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, like the kind of standard number of hours we think about, we tend to think of 40. Really, when it comes down to what I call proactive attention, where we have really good energy, where we're really able to do the most difficult stuff, solve the most difficult problems, come up with the best ideas, you've probably got about 12, right?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
when you really start to ration that down, like putting some really good quality thinking and definition into what needs to take up that really precious time. And also, really much more importantly than that is, how can I make sure that anything else is screened out of that really precious proactive attention time? So when you think of it as like, you've got 2 to 3 hours in your day where you're really on top form, like how do you make the most of those 2 to 3 hours? And my experience is the people who really nail that, it doesn't really matter what you do in the rest of the day and in the rest of the week, because you've done the hard work, and everything else will fall into place. It's really about how do you get really specific about managing that quality attention and having really good boundaries to make sure that only the stuff that really matters is the stuff that you put into that space.
I really love that. And, I think one of the things that I find when I'm really conscientious about blocking that time, protecting those hours, and for me, those are very early in the morning.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
and I think they are for a lot of people. Um, those are my hours of flow as well.
Yeah.
Those are the hours where it actually doesn't feel like work. It's coming and it's good. And, so I like the idea that, those are your meaningful hours
Mm.
finding that attention. That's really great.
I
Um,
actually just listened to a report this morning on BBC radio here from a UK university, and they've just done a study on happiness.
uh-huh.
And they found that between 6 and 8 a.m. are statistically the happiest hours of the day, which I don't think is that surprising, right? Because
No.
if I do early starts, then I'm sat at my desk, I'm watching the sun come up. The whole day is ahead of me. I'm optimistic. I'm full of like hope and energy. And it's not that surprising that those would be very happy hours of the day. Of
Yep.
course, if you've had a really late night the night before and your kids have been up or whatever, it's slightly different. But I do think there is something about using your kind of natural energy cycles and really kind of tagging onto that. And once you realize that, you'll realize you can get a whole bunch more done between 6 and 8 if that's your time than if you're, sort of floundering around at 3 or 4 in the afternoon and just feeling tired. It's like when you get to that point, just clock off. Like there's no
Just
point
let it
trying
go.
to
Mhm.
grind it out.
Yeah, yeah. Those are the hours where I feel like if I can go and take the dog for a walk for a few minutes,
Mm,
and then come back to it, sometimes that helps. This is something that I know is also in your productivity ninja book, but we haven't really touched on it. But I think it's germane. You have this concept of sort of going dark.
yeah,
Is that a piece of this attention management strategy?
yeah, for sure. So I talk about the idea of stealth and camouflage, which is basically tactical hiding in one way or another, right? So if you're in an open plan office, go and take your work and your laptop to the cafe downstairs or the kind of cleaning cupboard out the way, like whatever you need to do, just to make yourself deliberately a little bit less available. And then
Yes.
the same is true if you're hybrid working, you're working from home, putting yourself onto do not disturb, not answering emails straight away, putting your phone on airplane mode, all of these things that you can do to just make yourself a bit less available, which, particularly in, big corporate settings and stuff is so counterintuitive. People really struggle with that in the big corporates in that, it's all about being seen to be working rather than actually the work that you do. So I think that takes a lot of getting used to in certain environments. And, even in startups, it's like, especially when you don't have necessarily systems in place or very sort of robust ways of managing because it's all moving so quickly, you get noticed by being around. So it's really difficult to be a bit less available. But when you do that, you'll start to get noticed for the work that you're doing rather than just for being around.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a really big thing. I use on my phone an app called Freedom, which really helps me with that, which is basically an app where I can set it for certain they call them sessions on Freedom, but it means that through those hours, Instagram won't work on my phone. If I go onto the internet browser on my phone, I use DuckDuckGo for that, and then I'll go on to DuckDuckGo. If I put in like BBC Sport to try and look at football or something, it won't be valid. But if I just search the thing I want, then it's for work, it's okay. So
Yeah.
you can really set it in a way that either blocks certain websites, blocks certain apps. Because the biggest thing, when you start to think about how you manage your attention, and when you start to think about this idea of stealth and camouflage, the biggest barrier to all that is actually not everybody else. The biggest barrier is you. And
Yeah.
so I kind of think of it as like I've got to treat myself like a child, and I've got to treat myself like a child once and make that really sort of disciplined decision once to set freedom up on my phone, and then I don't have to keep using up my own willpower to make that happen over and over again. So yeah,
Brilliant.
freedom's the one that I use. But it's also, in like teams. So my company, Think Productive, we have no meetings on a Wednesday. We try not to set meetings first thing in the day. So we just, do some things culturally that just are all in service of helping people to manage their attention. And I do think it's one of those things that when I work with teams, I realize very quickly that people are just not having that conversation often enough. So
Mm,
people might talk about each other's output, but people don't tend to be talking about how can I help you to manage your attention? What hours do we really want to be in the kind of, as Cal Newport calls it, the deep work sort of time, or
mhm.
the sort of stealth and camouflage time? And then what time do we really want to have as the collaboration and social structures around as well? So I think like bringing some of those conversations to the surface rather than them almost being things that people are talking about things they don't have and resenting it, and then it builds tension. You've got to really have these conversations kind of out in the open and be really kind of honest about what everybody needs.
I love that. I love the point about being honest about what people need. And that starts with being honest with, what you need
Yeah,
and having that confidence because, one of the things that, you talk about that I think we hear occasionally that, no is a strategy, right? And, your idea that productivity is actually about saying no. It's
yeah,
not about saying yes. So, you can say yes to a million things, but if you choose to say no, that creates that space. I mean, as you think about whether it's apps or team conversations or the structure you create for yourself, what does that look like for, an entrepreneur perhaps who feels like productivity is just about trying to get a little ways down their to-do list, I mean, they're not thinking about it in terms of no's and yeses. What kind of guidance can you provide there?
yeah. So I read a really good blog post a few years ago by Tim Ferriss, and it was called "The Art of Letting Small Bad Things Happen." And he was kind of talking about this sort of similar idea of saying no and the sort of stealth and camouflage. But he listed out, he's like, right, so I didn't check my email today, and I was heads down doing, really important work, and I was really in flow, and lots of great things happened. But then here's the stuff that didn't happen, right? And it's like
Mhm.
somebody contacted me to go on a radio show, and it was an urgent request, and I missed it. I'll never get the chance to do that again. This other thing, I was invited to go and meet someone for coffee. I'm sure they were really nice, but I didn't go. And it was just this like list of these are the small things that we have to sacrifice in order for the big things. And I just think
Mm,
that's when you're sat there with a big long list of stuff. If you catch yourself having that thought, which is, I need to make a dent in this, I need to, tick a few off or whatever, you've really got to take a step back and work out, are these the things that I'm going to be famous for in a year's time or 3 years
yeah,
time,
yeah,
in this work? And so much of what we fill our time with is not that. It's the busy work, it's
yeah,
the bits in between, it's the things that fill the gaps rather than the stuff that really matters. And
yeah.
so, when people ask me like, what's my definition of productivity? It's kind of changed over the years, but the slightly more philosophical one for me is productivity is about making space for what matters.
Mm,
And if you just keep that in mind with everything that you're looking at, that as you scroll down your to-do list, if you keep that in mind all the time when you're making decisions about which projects are worth doing, which things do I need to advance, which things do I need to cut back on, that's just actually a really good place to be when it comes to productivity. So if you just keep it focused on how do I make space for the stuff that really matters, then yeah,
mhm.
that's really where you start to see, much better things happen.
No, I think that's great. I think, the priorities, and I think a lot of times we get a little bit paralyzed by these long to-do lists, and
Yeah.
it's really easy to fall into sort of productive procrastination. Like, I'm actually still doing things,
Yeah.
but are you though? And I think, you've talked a little bit about this idea of being present to overcome that procrastination. Does that align with this idea of just knowing what the priorities are?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I think we have to really, if we're going to understand procrastination, and if we're going to understand some of the underlying um, sort of negative emotions or not helpful emotions that really derail us and take us off track, you've got to be more present. So a lot of those sort of negative emotions, negative self-talk, it all comes from the amygdala, right? So it comes from the lizard brain part of the brain. It comes from the part of the brain that gives us fight or flight. It comes from the part of the brain that says, I need to blend in because I don't want to be ostracized. I can't stand out. I can't take risks, you know? And that part of the brain, because it's the evolutionary part of the brain, it's the part of the brain that shouts the loudest. So, I remember when I first released Productivity Ninja, I already had a successful business with Think Productive. And I was really worried as I put this book out there into the world with this kind of slightly controversial, sort of daring title of Productivity Ninja. It's kind of slightly a sort of wacky, attention-grabbing title. And I was really worried before I put this book out there. Are my current clients going to, reject this book and then they'll stop working with me? And I remember this one evening, like about a month before the book came out, where I spent the whole evening on Amazon just reading 1-star reviews of other business books. And it's like, why am I doing that? And it's like part of my brain, this lizard brain part of me is just catastrophizing about
Mm-hmm.
what could go wrong, when I put this thing out there. And we have that question in our head, what could go wrong all the time, that then leads to procrastination. And I think the only way you can really start to understand that part of your brain is just to be much more present. And that sounds really easy, and then it's quite hard to do, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
about going for walks or runs without your phone. It's about trying to leave gaps in between the things that you're doing rather than scrolling. It's, about getting enough sleep. It's about being hydrated enough. And it's ultimately also about slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
We, particularly when we feel under pressure, when we feel like we've got to deliver for clients, when we feel like there's all of this, stuff on a list that we need to do. The obvious temptation is, well, I'm just going to grind my way through it.
Yeah.
And you're doing yourself a massive disservice when you do that. As soon as you
Yeah.
start getting into that mindset, that kind of very toxic hustle mindset, which I think has just become really pervasive over the last few years. As soon as you're in that mindset, you lose being present because you're too busy. You can't be busy and
Mm.
present at the same time. It's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So when
Mm-hmm.
you start to really pull that back, that's when you start to notice that negative self-talk. That's where you become much more self-aware. It's also where you start to develop more empathy and kindness for the people around you. And so your team benefits by you slowing down and being more present as well. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there to unpack, but I think, yeah, just recognizing that if you can just get like 5% more self-aware,
Yeah.
and you start to think about the things that you're avoiding, and you start to think about the things that you're only doing because you're procrastinating and by not wanting to do something else, you can actually cut out a lot of stuff that needs to be done. You will actually have less on your plate as a result of that. So it's really counterintuitive. Slowing down will actually mean there's less to do. And,
No,
when
I
people
think
start
that's
to
great.
to really understand that, really good things happen, I think.
Yeah, I think that's great. And as we start to, wrap up here, I think that that's actually a really good place to land because your most recent book, Kind, beautifully titled, talks about taking time for self-kindness. And,
Yeah.
if I'm hearing you correctly, one of the additional benefits of slowing down, prioritizing, getting the things that don't matter off your list is you will end up with more time and you could actually do something really wonderful with it, which is to get a little more sleep, be a little kinder to yourself. Um, Knowing that we are talking to a lot of entrepreneurs for whom grind is actually much more of a natural state of being than self-kindness. How is there a good way to sort of think about that as a way to be more effective, as a way to be more productive ultimately?
Yeah, that's a lovely way of framing that question. So here's the thing. I think we are totally wired, particularly in the kind of working cultures that we're in, the US and the UK. We are wired towards a mindset that really focuses on scarcity rather than focusing on abundance. So we go through our working lives thinking there isn't enough time, or there isn't enough, or I am not enough. And when we move that from a scarcity mentality into an abundance mentality, and we start telling ourselves, a different story, and this is all a construct in our heads, right? But when we start telling ourselves a different story, which is that I am enough, there is enough time, there is enough, and I am enough, um, we can really start to treat ourselves in a much kinder and a very different way. And the thing about that is, when you start with kindness towards yourself, that's the story that is in your head all the time, right? So it's an abundant story, not a scarcity story. When that story is in your head, it becomes much easier as you sort of move through the world. When you talk to your colleagues, when you talk to your family, when you talk to your neighbors, everyone else, you're in an abundance mentality, not a scarcity one. And so you notice the opportunities to be kind to everybody else. So what I say in this new book, Kind, which is all about the quiet power of kindness at work, is that kindness starts with you. And when you operate in a way that allows that space and makes that space for you to be kind to yourself, and you have that abundance mentality, you see the kindness all around you. So when we take that to its conclusion, if you're ever in a situation where you're in that sort of grinding mentality, and your lizard brain is saying to you, keep going, there's loads more to do. What you've got to realize is that's not a thing that's actually going to be in service of the organization or the work. If you're tired, you won't produce great work in that moment. But actually, by slowing down, taking that step back, and being more present and giving yourself self-kindness, you're role modeling that abundance mentality rather than the scarcity one for everybody else. So everybody sees you take some time for you, they get to take some time for them. Everybody sees you being kind either to yourself or to other people around you because you're in that abundance mode. They get to see that kindness, they get to be kind to each other. And all the studies find that when you have a culture that's built on kindness and empathy, and it builds trust, and that builds psychological safety. When you have psychologically safe organizations, what do you get? Higher productivity, higher innovation, better retention, better profit margins. Like, the studies point to this stuff being super useful in terms of how we build teams that are actually high performing teams. So there's an awful lot, that you can list off around that. But, ultimately, something that I really learned the hard way, I think, in my 20s, was you really need to know when it's time to check out, and when it's time to really give yourself a break, to be kinder to yourself, because that's the stuff that's going to lead to you being kinder to other people. You can't ultimately, expect to be someone who is naturally kind to others around you if you're not being kind to yourself first.
Yeah, yeah, that idea of modeling is really, really important, and I think it's a great reminder. Particularly when leaders get so busy with the building part of the business that they forget that people are watching them. They are setting examples,
For
and I
sure.
also love that what you've done is just brought us full circle back to managing attention and not
Mm.
time. And where are we putting our attention? And if we're putting our attention on being kind to ourselves and making sure that we are making space for our priorities and to get into a state of flow and to do all of those things, that's wonderful. It's a great place to land. And so, Graham, I am just beyond grateful for you, for your experience and your intelligence and the tips that you've shared today. Obviously, you have a wealth of research and thinking in your books. Where can people find them? Where's the best place to go?
Yeah. So, you'll find How to Be a Productivity Ninja and Kind, The Quiet Power of Kindness at Work. Amongst, I have a couple of other books as well, but you'll find
Yeah.
all of those on on Amazon or like other bookstores that you have there. And then if you want to just catch up with me and what I'm doing, the best place to go is if you just go to grahamallcott.com/links. That's like all the stuff that I'm working on. And I do this weekly email that goes out every Sunday evening UK time, which is just designed to have one productive or positive idea for the week ahead. And it just goes out every Sunday evening. So if you want to sign up to that, you'll get that on my website, which is you'll also find it at grahamallcott.com/links.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure that all of those things are in the show notes so that it's really easy for people to find. And again, we are so grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to the BIP Ventures Extraordinary Pursuits podcast. Check the show notes on our blog for the resources we discussed. You can find Extraordinary Pursuits on your favorite audio platform. Be sure to subscribe to the BIP Ventures YouTube channel and connect with us on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram so you get all the stories, learnings, and ideas for ways to thrive in the innovation economy. And if you liked this episode, be generous. Share it.